All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Logan Mills. I am the community organizer with the Maine Women's Lobby Education Fund. And today I am so excited to be interviewing Councilor Rea. And would you like to please introduce yourself to our students?
Sure thing. So my name is Alicia Rea. I am a Lewiston City Councilor and I represent Ward 3. This is my second term serving in office, so just coming up on about 3 years of service there. In addition to being on the City Council, I'm also the City Council's representative to the school committee, and so I fully serve as a voting member on that committee, as well as a committee assignment with the Lake Auburn Watershed Protection Commission, and my other committee assignment is the Androscoggin County Budget Committee. So lots of extracurriculars that come along with my regular title.
Yeah, and those are three pretty different areas as well. So it sounds like you really have a lot on your plate. Would you mind talking a little bit about the role of a city councilor in local government, and also what that looks like for you personally? Because I'm sure everyone brings something a little different to that position.
Yeah, definitely. So in my position representing Ward 3 in Lewiston, it's a very densely populated area. It includes much of the kind of traditional business district as well, and lots of folks who are kind of in apartments and moving around and need some different resources than the more rural folks. So I take my job very seriously as a constituent resource, basically. And so I have lots of folks who live in my area reach out to me about potholes or about trash collection or anything having to do with municipal government. And I take their needs and I try to find out answers and get back to them as quickly as I can. Doesn't mean they're always happy with those answers, but definitely I try my hardest to be very responsive and responsible when I'm able to.
Wonderful. And so what does, and so that sounds like that has a lot that you're almost kind of on call for. So what does a day in your life tend to look like, and how much of that do you know what you're going to be going in, and how much of it is you're showing up and kind of your day has to kind of navigate from there?
Yeah, it changes, especially during the times of year. So, so the way I approach my work is once I get outreach from a constituent or, a report that I have to read in preparation for a city council meeting that I might need to do some research on and reach out to a department head about, I do it immediately. And this is a trait that I picked up when I first moved to Maine about 8 years ago. I worked at Husson University in a residential life position. And so I had regular day-to-day tasks. However, an emergency could come up at any moment. And so that was my first job out of college, and being able to set priorities that way has really helped me in this very different role now. So anytime I get an email or a phone call, I do my best to try to be understanding, to reach out to the people who are in the know and see what solutions we can find. And sometimes that takes all day. But the Lewiston City Council is not a particularly well-paid position. It takes about 20 hours a week, I'd say, but I make maybe $1 an hour. So I also have a full-time job that is not related at all. So it's interesting to have to switch gears sometimes, and I end up taking a lot of vacation time off of work to meet my civil engagement and community obligations.
Wow. And so that's, I think, something that a lot of folks might not realize about folks who are not like, a House rep or a Senate rep or something, where that really is, that's your job now. But this is actually, it's a paid position, but it sounds like it is more volunteer than it's certainly not like a minimum wage sort of thing for every hour that you work, so is that a challenge to balance all of those different needs?
I would definitely say so. In my job that I work full-time for pay, I travel quite a bit for it, to New York and Boston, DC, a little bit out west as well. And so balancing time when I really do need to be in the city and connecting with folks with those work requirements. And luckily, my workplace is super accommodating. I worked there for about 4 years before I embarked on this, and I work very closely with my boss on what time looks like and how I get my job done in certain hours. But I'd say that the city obligations come first. So anytime there is a conflict, we kind of lay things out, assess them, and just make the right decision for what's best for Lewiston.
Wow, that's really great to hear that you have a job that's so accommodating. Though I also, it's unfortunate that folks who are already adding so much to their community must sort of pull from their own calendar and their own personal lives in order to make those commitments happen. But I'm certainly glad that you're there and you're able to be doing that sort of balancing. Also, I was an RA in college, and I definitely think that some of the things that I learned as an RA have definitely translated at least into the political world. Not only discussions of social justice, but also just like how to make a good looking bulletin board, and
Very, very helpful, good icebreakers for when you're doing canvassing at doors or at social events. Yeah.
Yep. How to get college students to care about what you have to say. That can be its own challenge.
For sure.
Wonderful. Well, I'm curious to know a little bit more about the process of you actually running for office. I think a really big question that we've had from our students, and something that has a different answer for everyone, is how did you arrive at that decision to run for office, and when did you feel ready, like, yes, I can do this? And if that moment didn't happen at all and you just did it without feeling ready, then, that's an answer we've gotten plenty as well.
Yeah. So I moved to Maine back in 2012. So I've been here about 8 years now. And I am so lucky that I've come into welcoming communities. So I lived in Bangor for about 2 years. And while I was there, I was very curious about Maine National Education for Women Leadership and their program that's previously run through or at the University of Maine. And so I did that program in 2014, which was a really great introduction to Maine politics in general. It's a bipartisan women's program where you go for a week and you learn all the ins and outs. And so that was a really good first step to understanding the Maine landscape. I grew up in the Boston area of Massachusetts, which is totally different for government and politics. So good crash course back in 2014. A couple months later, I moved to Lewiston and made some really wonderful friends, including current city councilors. And so Isabel Golden was the Ward 3 city councilor prior to me. And when she was accepted to law school at the University of Maine and realized that might be something she needed to prioritize wisely, she spoke with me about running for her seat. And I was not ready yet. So I worked full time. I also was finishing my master's program in public policy through the American University Online. And so I had thesis coming up and still decided to run. Ended up being unopposed through some conversations with folks who were also interested, and made a lot of effort to say, I can represent your voice and I'm really interested in this. So what's an agreement we can come to? And so I ended up being the only candidate on the ballot and winning, and then joining to serve as I embarked on my 6-month thesis project as well. So, so that was a little stressful, but every day I learn something new and get to apply old learnings and old ways of doing things as well. So it's been a great experience, and I'm glad I started when I did.
That's really cool. And also that you were just finishing up a master's in public policy at the time. And so obviously you're working with public policy in your position as a counselor, and that's where your training is. Were you able to kind of make those two things work together, like loop in any of your city councilor work with your thesis? Or also another thing I'm curious about is how does sort of the academic world of public policy meet the boots on the ground? We're actually trying to change something. And is that looking like the way you expected it to look?
Yeah, those are all great questions. I would say, so my thesis was on, so I worked with a small group on this kind of capstone project for our thesis, where we examined school department budgets in different regions, and we looked at them prior to the 2008 recession, during, and now, to see if they had recovered to pre-recession funding levels. Were they utilizing the same sources? And so the answer was no. No one had bounced back quite yet. And now we're in a new economic downturn. And so what does that mean?
Yeah.
And so that was really related to my school committee work. So going through and doing my first city and school committee budget kind of parallel to each other, and also looking at school budgets for, we did 5 samples of regions. It was really illuminating. And so I'd say some of the more formulaic stuff, such as budgets, that was incredibly helpful to have that formal education, because where I work, I'm kind of mid-level. I don't have responsibility over a budget. I mean, my home budget, but nothing quite the scale of a municipal or school department. And so I'd say that part really helps. I'd say on the policy side, not as much. Interestingly, I think, what's right for Lewiston isn't cookie cutter to what's right for other communities or even national policy. So you do have to kind of take it with a grain of salt. But I think the kind of diligence that I got from the academic study and applying that to the real life study has been the best part, for sure.
Wow. Yeah, I'm really glad that you're able to find, some commonalities there. I did theater in college, and actually there's a lot in common, but we've actually covered that. Our community organizing, we had 2 of us had theater degrees, and we're like, here we are. But that's really fascinating. And I'm certainly grateful that you have that background, though, as we've also seen, folks come into elected office from a huge variety of backgrounds, and sometimes you are really learning things as you go, and other times you kind of get there and you have a base of knowledge that you at least think is going to be helpful, but it all kind of changes when you're actually sitting down to do the work. So one area that we've talked about with almost every person that we've interviewed is just gender representation in politics. And usually that has looked like being one of the only women in the room or one of very few women in the room. And do you have any experiences relating to the sort of the gender dynamics in local government and what your experience with them has been?
Absolutely. So I entered a council with 3 female members out of the 7 members in the elected mayor. I'd say the places where it also becomes evident is who your department heads are for municipal staff. And so our city administrator, our deputy, they're male, and they're wonderful folks, but there's a different dynamic that's presented. And so on the city council, it's always been a little bit balanced. And now I serve with the same ratio, 3 women with the remainder being men. And I think you just have to carve out your space for speaking. And I think I've gotten better at that over time. I had some great mentors who taught me that. So former Mayor Kristen Cloutier has been bulldozing a path that I have lovingly walked behind her on. And she's
so cool. We've done a couple of things with her, and she is just such a fun person to talk to.
Yeah, and has just set such a great example for what service to the city should look like. And now, so I'm the most senior member of municipal government in my 2nd term with 2 newbies who are also female, Councilor Stephanie Jelinas and Councilor Sophia Khalid. And it's just been such a pleasure to be a resource for them. And not to say that I know everything or really anything, but being able to work together. And one of those is across party lines. So it's just a real pleasure to be able to set that. On the other hand, so I was mentioning earlier, I serve on the council, the county budget committee. There we go. And that is a fascinating place. It is very male. Kristen Cloutier and I were the only 2 female members out of a 14-member body.
Wow.
And in our 2nd year, I ran to be the chair of that committee and was awarded that. And so it feels good to have a voice there, because otherwise you can kind of easily fade into the background in such a large body of members of service. But I think I know my stuff when it comes to budgets. I have done a lot of them now, and I'm not afraid to be very vocal about them, but also give the members of the body equal speaking time, because even if we don't agree, it's a deliberative body for a reason.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate that you are in charge of that entire body and are really looking to make sure that every voice is included at that table. I think it's really fascinating as we kind of move into understanding that just like a yes or no vote isn't always the best way to get every voice to be heard, and to make sure that all opinions, that sometimes that minority opinion can actually be the really important one, because they're really looking at what got missed.
Definitely. And you were saying before, your theater major. So my undergraduate degree is in religious studies.
Oh,
and so
cool.
I feel like I approach politics in the way that I approached religion throughout college and through that study, where everyone thinks they're right. So how can you all be right? And how can you work together for more harmony moving forward? And so I think having that kind of background and applying it to politics, and not just being, I can be dismissive of some ideas, but when we're having a real policy discussion, there's so much value in the dissenting opinions and what you can draw from them, and how you can come closer together to create a bridge through that.
Absolutely. And that's a fascinating background to have. That's probably one of the only places I can imagine that people come with even harder opinions about, what the facts are. And I think increasingly, I think that the study of religion is fascinating because of that, because you have groups that do have very specific facts that they adhere to in terms of their worldview, in terms of their philosophy and their religion. And in politics right now, we also have a situation where folks are sometimes coming to the table with totally different sets of facts that that are not compatible. And it just must be a really great skill set to already have on board.
I think it's just that I like arguing, no matter what. It might be that.
Absolutely. Well, I get that too. And if we weren't recording this, it's an area that I find fascinating, and would love to chat with you more about it someday. So I think one thing that folks, that especially our students, have seen that they weren't necessarily expecting is the fact that a lot of the elected representatives in our state, in city councilors, are actually younger than what they expect. And what we really wanted to be able to do is find folks who are maybe, while we've had some incredible legislators come in and they have years of decades of experience, it's sometimes a little harder for our students to imagine getting from where they are to where that person is. And so did you have anything to say about maybe the general age that folks tend to be, and how, and whether or not you need to be like a certain age to be an effective representative for your community?
Yeah, I think that's a critical question that Maine especially has to ask. Having one of the oldest populations, if not the oldest in the nation.
The oldest.
And we want to progress forward. And how else can we do that, if not with new ideas and new ways of approaching all of this? I think government for a long time has worked for certain folks, and those are the folks who were elected. And so one, besides gender representation, another area that is just completely missing or is very difficult to fill is the youth, and up through when folks start families and are raising families. So I think the demands of these positions are such that women get boxed out as a factor of childcare and raising families, or they are just seen as young and inexperienced. It's less likely that I hear that a young male entering into our political realm is inexperienced or too green or emotional. Is the other one that I hear a lot.
It's not it's like it's passion or it's motivation or he's a go-getter.
Yeah, and so the duality of those conversations is fascinating. And so I, in my first term, was the youngest counselor. I came in at 27, finished my term at 29. This year, I've bumped up to being the third youngest counselor. So we have Counselor Khalid, who is I believe 23 years old, and Councilor Jensen, and he is just a year or two younger than me, maybe 28 or 29. And so the whole perspective has really shifted. But I will say there are very few folks who serve at the council level who have families that they're raising. So it's either folks with adult children, or they might be very young children. And so we're missing kind of that opportunity in between. Once you move over to the school committee, you have a very different group, because
I would imagine.
Purpose. Yeah. So it's really interesting to see the decisions for the city being made by people who have the time and capacity, which is, you do need that, but it kind of stinks that we're boxing out this whole subset of the population.
Do you find that your work with the school board has allowed you to maybe be a little bit of a bridge of like, oh, I've worked with you on the school board, and you know what? I think that you would be really good over here. And you might not have thought of it because you have 3 kids to raise, and of course you're worried about their school, but have you tried to sort of encourage that age group to say, you know, we really need your voice because you're raising kids in our community?
Yeah, we try to have these discussions, but it hasn't really succeeded so far. It's something I definitely want to continue to work on, because I think there's such a bridge between the two. And our current mayor is the former school board chair, and he has adult children. And Councilor Jensen, who I just mentioned, also served on the school committee with me in the past term. But he, like me, is young but does not have a family yet. And so different perspectives. It's also interesting, the folks who are born and raised in Lewiston versus someone like me who's a transplant, kind of looking at it from the outside a little bit more. So there are always interesting conversations. We're always looking for opportunities to have those folks come up and over, but again, it's a personal choice too.
Has that been something that you've had to bump up against a little bit? Because I mean, I grew up in Vermont, and I've lived in Portland for almost 4 years or so at this point, and I love it. But even in my short amount of time working in politics, I've occasionally met someone who's like, okay, but like you're not a Mainer. You don't get it. And I'm like, okay, I might not get it, but I also grew up in Vermont, which is like 2 feet that way. So like,
yeah, I get that all the time. That folks try to take my last name and they say, are you related to this person? It's like, probably not, because none of my family lives in this state. It's just me, and it's just been me for almost a decade now. So that makes it a little harder. But I mean, the relationships that I've built through all of these community partnerships help me to gain that perspective. And so I can go to a friend of the family who's been in Lewiston for so many generations and talk about, okay, so what's that noticeable shift? And I think that's where the constituent relationships are the most important. I mean, I do not have kids in the school system, so if I need to know about what's going on at a school, I can ask 5 different people about what their perspective is. And I don't always take every bit word for word, because I think we trust our staff too, but it's helpful to get kind of the download.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, sometimes that fresh perspective is an important thing. I think maybe just for me personally, just as a way to like give myself a bit of like, no, you can be at this table. It's like, well, I am the 20-something who moved to Maine looking to like start a life here or start a family here. And I do know that Vermont is, like Maine, is a very sort of brain drain kind of state where kids will grow up here and get educated here and then move away. And if you want to try and get to the root of that problem, I think it's also worth talking about, why did you come here? And like what really drew you to Maine? Because it might be what could get somebody to stay in Maine as well.
Absolutely. I don't think I ever thought I had not really been to Maine prior to securing that job up at Hudson University, and then where I still work now at Bates College. And I mean, the opportunities I've been afforded are exactly what work for me. And so as I sit there at governmental tables and think about, how does this appeal to me and people like me? That's a value add to the conversation. Or Councilor Khalid, who grew up here from a young age, and why does she stick around here? I mean, there's such value in each part of that conversation, and we just need to talk about it in a public setting too.
Absolutely. Well, so one more question that I had for you, and I'm looking forward to your perspective on this, is just basically what's the best way for a young person who wants to give more to their community to maybe get more involved in specifically in sort of the local governmental systems that you work in? Because we're, of course, being a nonprofit, we're like, just reach out to a nonprofit that works on the issue and they'll get you involved in all that. But there are already local government structures as well that do really incredible work that's really ongoing. And so just, are there any ways for, say, like our 8th grade students to dig in a little bit more into their communities?
Yeah, so I think your first inclination, also working for a nonprofit, that's a great way to start. They always need help. The other ways that I've gotten involved is through board and volunteer work in the community. Just showing up to things is really helpful. And then, yeah, just being willing. The only unfortunate part is, especially in Lewiston's charter, you have to be at least 20 years old to run for office, which is a real shame. I think if you're 18, you should be able to participate in the system that you're voting upon, but we haven't had a charter commission in a while, so I'll bring that up when it's time. And there are other opportunities too. So Lewiston has an amazing youth advisory council for students who are in high school, so folks should definitely look into those. And then there's great opportunities. Olympia Snow Leadership Institute has a lot to offer, as well as Maine National Education for Women Leadership. So there's all these resources that exist. Not having been a Maine kid who grew up here, I don't know all of them, but I think if you're looking for something, it probably already exists, and if it doesn't, it's a great opportunity to create it.
Absolutely. Well, great. I think that we're coming toward the end of this. Were there any last things that you wanted to say to our students? Just big takeaways from your time in Maine in an elected office?
Yeah, I think just continuing to approach things with as even a temper as you can. I know things are really polarized in these times, even as we are in the midst of a pandemic. People have different opinions and are hearing different facts. And so just remembering to approach everything, remembering that we are all trying to think about what's best and who is it best for. And so that's the question I always ask myself. Is this the best thing for Lewiston? Is this the best thing for Maine? And I think those are really great guiding questions.
Wonderful. Well, Councilor Rea, thank you so much for joining us for this interview. I can't wait for all of our Girls' Day participants to see this. So thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Logan.
All right, take care.
Bye.